You separate a baby who needs skin-to-skin contact, the sound of their mother's voice, her eyes, her physical and emotional presence to soothe that baby when they're in distress from moment to moment, to help to regulate their emotions. It's overstimulating, it's stressful. If you walk into any daycare, you are going to hear many, many children crying. And if you've ever had a baby crying, you know that that baby is going to get the other babies crying. And now you have 5 babies crying. There's no way you can soothe them when they're in distress. There's no way you can regulate all those babies' emotions. That means people cannot regulate their emotions. And so we're just giving them pills. We're not saying, where does emotional regulation come from? What's the origin of it? And the origin of it is in the... If you want to raise children and be the primary attachment figure for your children, and it's usually the mother, sometimes it's the father now, but it's still usually the mother, children need a primary attachment figure as present as possible in the first 3 years if they are going to be mentally healthy in the future. All of the research shows that. If you're going to be as physically present as possible, unless you've saved a lot of money as a woman, you need to depend on your partner, on your team member. Children are dependent on us. If you don't have to have children to be happy, but if you are going to bring children into this world, you have a responsibility to those children, and it surpasses any individual desire you may have.
And you're saying the mother should be there in those opening years?
The primary attachment figure, who's usually the mother. Daycare is terrible for children. Let's define daycare. Daycare is anything under the age of 3. So anything under the age of 3 where you put your child in group care is daycare. And what it really is, they're day orphanages. You separate a baby who needs skin-to-skin contact, the sound of their mother's voice, her eyes, her physical and emotional presence to soothe that baby when they're in distress from moment to moment, to help to regulate their emotions. So 2 things mothers do. They buffer children from stress, which is so important because the part of their brain that regulates stress is meant to remain offline for the first year and very quietly, slowly come online for the next 2 years. So what are we doing? We're throwing babies into these institutional orphanages. It's overstimulating. It's stressful. If you walk into any daycare, you are going to hear many, many children crying. Children are not meant to cry much in the first year. They're meant to be held by their mothers and held against their mothers' bodies. So they buffer children from stress and they regulate their emotions. So what we're seeing as a mental health crisis is a crisis of emotional regulation issues in children, adolescents, and adults. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, these are all emotional regulation issues. That means people cannot regulate their emotions. And so we're just giving them pills. We're not saying, where does emotional regulation come from? What's the origin of it? And the origin of it is in the very early days of your life. If you had a mother who soothed you when you were in distress from moment to moment, it regulates your emotions. So it's only after 3, 85% of the right brain is developed by 3. It's only after 3 that you start to internalize the ability to regulate your own emotions or to deal with stress and adversity in the future.
So does that mean that if I'm not home as a mother for those early 3 years, you think there's possible chances that my child might grow up to be somewhat traumatized or have some kind of...
It is not what nature intended for us. And so we have made social changes that are about narcissism and self-orientation and me, and don't involve an understanding of children's irreducible developmental needs. And if we did, then maybe more women wouldn't have children, and that would be fine. I have no problem. I'm not a pronatalist. You don't have to have children to be happy. You can, build businesses, build houses, have loving, intimate relationships, not have children. But if you're going to have children, you need to know that dropping and running, putting them in daycare, or now, let's talk about very poor women, because this is always going to come back at me. What about very poor women? There are so many solutions for very poor women that do not involve daycare. And I hate when people say poor women have to rely on daycare. Why should they have to rely on daycare when rich women don't have to rely on daycare? And the truth is there are other solutions. Poor women can live together and support one another and form communities. They can share care of a caregiver. It's far better to have a single surrogate attachment figure, a babysitter who is a full-time babysitter, than putting a child in daycare. So if you can't be there and you're poor and you have to work, then it's far better to have first kinship bonds. someone who's related to you, because it's going to be a more similar investment in that child than anyone else. Secondly, a single surrogate caregiver, a babysitter or nanny. If you can't afford it, share the care with another mother, because that's still going to be better for that child than putting them into an institutional group environment. Because what you're doing is you're basically putting usually no less than 5 children with one caregiver under the age of 3. In some cases, it's under the age of 1. And if you've ever had a baby crying, you know that that baby is going to get the other babies crying. And now you have 5 babies crying. There's no way you can soothe them when they're in distress. There's no way you can regulate all those babies' emotions. We are doing terrible damage to our children by putting them in daycare. Now, daycare was the feminist agenda. It was about the second wave of feminism. They said, put your babies in daycare. It's the only way you're going to go back to work and work. And they didn't talk about children. The first wave of feminists, they talked about children. Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft, they believed that mothering was powerful work. It was work. It was a career. It was admired. It was elevated. They also believed in fighting the patriarchy. They believed in equality, but they didn't forget about mothering. The second wave of feminists, I think it was Betty Friedan, said that staying at home with your children was, she called it a concentration camp with comforts. That was the beginning of the tide. That's when the tide turned for women, where the narrative changed. So women who were loving being mothers and loving raising children, suddenly were told that they were in a concentration camp and that they were prisoners and oppressed. And some of them were, and some of them probably shouldn't have had children, and many of them weren't. And even today, people write me every day and say, thank you for saying what you say, because society's narrative is so much about we have no value unless we go out into the workforce.